okay, now that you understand why you want to auto-enroll and auto-escalate your people, what do you do about controlling the costs? Because I think that's a legitimate question that a lot of plan sponsors have. This is 401k Specialist Editor-in-Chief Brian Anderson, and this is the 401k Specialist Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about challenging common beliefs about automated plan features in 401ks, such as auto-enrollment and auto-escalation, that have become essential tools for boosting employee participation and contribution levels. We're going to get to it right after this brief message.
65% of workers say they prioritize retirement, according to Principal Research, but half still aren't participating, reports the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The latest Principal data shows how automated plan features can help flip the script. While these features aren't new, there's a substantial opportunity to optimize impact. In this episode, we dig into the numbers, the missed opportunities, and the actions employers and financial professionals should consider. Get the tools, resources, and insights to help enhance plan design features at principal.com/retirement-insights.
Joining us today to explore what's happening with auto features in workplace retirement plans, we're happy to have a pair of subject matter experts making a repeat appearance on the 401k Specialist Podcast in Marc Howell and Felix Okwaning, who are managing directors of enhanced plan design at Principal Financial Group. Marc and Felix, welcome back to the 401k Specialist Podcast.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for having us.
All right, well, we've got a bunch of questions for both of you, so let's just jump right in. So it seems like there are two common concerns among plan sponsors with automated plan features. One, that employees don't want to be auto-enrolled, and two, the potential for added cost to the organization. But your research has kind of shown that that's not actually the case. Marc, can you get us started by telling us about that?
Absolutely. So I think when we think about the issue of employees not wanting to be auto-enrolled and the concern amongst some employers about that, I think honestly a lot of that comes back to some of the original issues that occurred when auto-enrollment and auto-escalation were first allowed in the United States in the year 2000 or so. You know, it was about 25 years ago. And when you think about it, it was new, it was unexpected for employees. And so there was a lot of upheaval when some early adopters put them in place from employees who basically were suddenly looking at their paycheck and realizing their employers were taking money away from their paycheck and maybe not totally understanding where that money was going. Now, the nice thing is, that was 25 years ago and things have changed pretty significantly. For a lot of employees, they actually expect to be auto-enrolled now. Kind of interesting, in fact, how many of them really do expect that and actually appreciate it. I've seen studies where it's considered to be an employee benefit by many employees if they are auto-enrolled and or auto-escalated. And in fact, it's so prevalent that they think that we've done some research into what we would refer to as eligible but not participating employees. These would be people who are eligible to participate in the plan but are not actually deferring money into the plan. And one of the honestly kind of terrifying things that we found, in my opinion, is that of those people who are eligible but not participating, almost 60% of them actually thought they were saving for retirement. And of those people, roughly half of those people thought they had been auto-enrolled. So if you're not auto-enrolling or auto-escalating it these days, the reality is a lot of your employees may actually be expecting you to do so and may not be taking the action themselves because they may be assuming that you would do so. We've also seen a lot of information or sort of just a change in the way opt-out rates have occurred as well. Again, over the sort of the 25 years as people have gotten more used to auto-enrollment and auto-escalation. It used to be, I'd estimate opt-out rates in the 10 to 15% range. And that was, maybe 10, 15 years ago. The reality of life now is, typically speaking, if you auto-enroll people at anything at or below 6%, the opt-out rates we see in the industry are typically single digits, so 5 to 8% maybe. Obviously, if you have a sort of special workforce, right? If you have a workforce that maybe is a little bit unusual, very low paid, very high turnover, you're going to see higher opt-out rates. But typically speaking, you can pretty much assume if you auto-enroll your people up to 6%, you're going to see a single digit opt-out rate because most people understand that's what they should be doing. And most people understand that's what they want to be doing. It's just you're taking care of it for them. So all of that being said, I think we're going to spend a lot of the rest of our time together talking about, okay, now that you understand why you want to auto-enroll and auto-escalate your people, what do you do about controlling the costs? Because I think that's a legitimate question that a lot of plan sponsors have.
All right. Well, it seems like there's definitely a few disconnect issues to overcome here. But now you talk about two places to look to fund auto increases within the plan and outside the plan at the overall benefits budget. Felix, can you tell us a little bit more about ideas within the plan?
Yeah, so as Mark mentioned, I mean, the key here is you really need to think about how to auto enroll and auto escalate your employees, even when you have budget constraints. And the way I like to think about this, or the way I like to advise plan sponsors and other financial professionals about this, is think about it in two steps, right? There is the manage cost aspect of it, but there's also the mitigate risk aspect of it. And what sort of risk do you expose yourself to if you're not getting your employees to a place where they can transfer into retirement successfully? So think about the managing the cost, right? Which is, how do we manage it within the budget? There's several ways of doing that. First and foremost, if your goal is really to get your employees to get to a place where they can retire successfully, then you want to auto enroll them. But if there is a cost to it, think about how you adjust your design. And the design could be adjusted in managing the caps on the employer piece of the contribution, managing even the design in such a way that your cost doesn't expand or doesn't increase with employees participating at a high level through the auto enrollment and auto escalation. Putting in different types of designs that would actually allow you to, again, auto enroll and auto escalate employees without increasing the cost. Think about the non-elective and profit sharing contributions that you may have, using that as a strategic way to maybe make up for some of the cost of employees auto enrolling and auto escalating, rather than just handing over that money directly to employees. There are multiple ways of looking at your design in such a way that it actually helps you manage the cost on the back end without limiting the employees from auto enrolling and auto escalating.
All right. What about looking beyond the retirement plan budget to uncover some broader funding strategies? Mark, can you speak a little bit to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a project a few years ago with a client that was really struggling with adding the auto enrollment and the auto escalation due to cost. So they had auto enrollment at a low rate, it was about 2%. And they actually called me in because their advisor on the plan had come to the committee meeting and told them that one of their employees had come to that individual. The person was 65 years old and had $10,000 in their 401k, and basically was in tears because they realized they were not going to be able to retire at that point in time. So the advisor brought this to the committee. The committee realized, okay, we need to do something about this. And so they called, myself and my team in, and we started looking at ways to expand the auto enrollment and expand the auto escalation. So auto enroll people at a higher rate, do a sweep through the population to get anybody who had been missed, and auto escalate to a much higher rate as well to try to get people on a better path. The organization loved what it did for the outcomes for their people. It really took their population and turned up the potential outcomes and the projected outcomes just across the board for their population. It looked fantastic. But we did a lot of the work Felix was talking about just previously around modifying the match program, making some design changes to try to help mitigate the cost impact. And the organization actually took a look at it and said, we love what this is doing for our people, but we're not comfortable reducing the match to pay for it. So they actually started thinking broader. They recognized that retirement doesn't have to be seen in a vacuum, but the reality of retirement funding is that it's part of the total compensation package. And so for this organization, they actually looked at their bonus pool, and they were a large organization. They had a bonus pool of about $100 million a year. They wound up taking $8 million from that bonus pool to pay for the auto enrollment, auto escalation, while not changing their formula at all. Their thinking being that we can give a little bit less in bonus, which tends to get, spent on kind of day-to-day things, maybe vacations, paying off debt, whatever. But by using that 8% more strategically, we can drive outcomes significantly better for our people than they would have seen otherwise. And really, I encourage a lot of my plan sponsors to think about things that way, to really look at, if you can't balance it within retirement, or if you don't necessarily want to balance it within retirement, what other programs might exist out there that might be able to lend a little bit of a helping hand in terms of budget. Sometimes there's low use programs that can be trimmed a little bit. Sometimes there's even soft dollar cost savings that occur if you can get a program that helps you better retain your employees. A lot of organizations maybe suffer from higher turnover for specific skill sets. And when they start digging into what it costs to recruit new employees when somebody leaves, the value of enhancing their plan in ways to try to improve retention becomes very significant, because the cost of replacing those people otherwise might far outweigh the cost of the auto-enrollment and auto-escalation features.
It seems like these auto features don't just get added one at a time. Why is it so important to add auto features together?
So as I had mentioned kind of in my previous story about the employer that had the auto-enrollment at 2% and no auto-escalation, a lot of what we're seeing here is that people do what we implicitly tell them to do. The auto-enrollment, auto-escalation, the idea was it would use human inertia for us by pushing people to do the right thing, and they had to opt out. They had to take action to, in essence, not do the right thing. So if you auto-enroll people, it's going to get the great majority of people in the plan, as we discussed. But if you fail to auto-escalate, it's surprising how many of your employees are going to stay at that auto-enrollment rate. And the reality of life is, I've seen a ton of different studies. I've kind of looked into it myself as well. And pretty typically, rule of thumb, if you're trying to replace your standard of living in retirement, you probably as an individual need to be saving somewhere between 12 to 18% in total within your 401k program. What that means in total is that's your employee dollars going into the plan as well as any employer dollars going into the plan. So if you are an employer that has, say, a 50-cent match on 6, you're contributing 3% to your employees. The reality is, to get them to that 12 to 18% target, you need your employees to be saving between 9 and 15% into the plan. And one of the most powerful tools you have as a plan sponsor to get them there is that auto-enrollment and auto-escalation being used together. I would also just encourage anyone listening, if you've done an auto-enrollment once, you've done auto-escalation, but only for those people who are auto-enrolled, and you haven't done anything again for a while, look at maybe doing an auto sweep. And what that is going back through your workforce and pushing them to get into the plan again. I really like this kind of a concept. Just to give an example from my own life, when I was in my early 20s, I'd just gotten married. We had a child fairly quickly thereafter. And so the reality of life is I probably wasn't saving enough in my 401k program. If my employer at that time had said, hey, we want to auto-enroll you at 6%, I probably would have had to say, no, thank you. I need the money for life right now. But the reality is, if the employer doesn't ask a lot of people again, they may not think about it again until they're 35 or 40. I was a retirement professional, so I kind of knew what I was missing, and I got in the plan as quickly as I possibly could. That's not normal. And so those auto sweep features are an excellent way to get people into the plan again, or at least make them look at it again and say, no, now is not the right time, but I'm going to keep thinking about it.
All right, I like the auto sweep idea. Now I know there are long-term costs to employers if they don't add auto features. Felix, can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, so the biggest long-term cost that I think is going to be impacting employers, or has even started impacting them, is really the cost of delayed retirement. And at principle, we've done a significant in-depth research on what it does cost employers when employees delay retirement. Now think about this. There's been a significant transfer or shift from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans over the last 40 or so years. This shift actually happened really around Gen X and entering the workforce. According to really the National Institute on Research by Boston College, 40% of Gen X workers have no retirement savings. And these Gen Xs really get into that stage where they're going to be transitioning from the active workforce into retirement. Our research actually shows that for each year, assuming that an employee wants to retire at age 65, for each year the employee stays beyond age 65, it costs the plan sponsor, it costs the employer over $100,000. Now, think about what Marc talked about earlier on about auto-enrolling your employees at 6%. If you had a design that was providing maybe a 50% match on 6, and you auto-enrolled your employees at 6%, for a 40-year career, the total employer spend is somewhere around $100,000, right? So think about each of those years broken down over that total 40-year period. You as an employer, you're going to spend just about $100,000. But for a 1-year delay in retirement, you end up spending about $100,000 or thereabouts. Now that becomes a multiplicative effect where if your employees delay retirement more than 1 year, so for 2 years, you can add it up, it becomes 200. For 3 years, it becomes 300. And that cost starts to grow. But over the period of their career, you would have only spent about $100,000 providing for a matching contribution of 3% into their retirement program. And that's why it's very important to auto-enroll them and actually take that cost upfront versus delaying retirement to when they get to, or getting them to age 65 and recognizing that they don't have enough money to actually transition into the retirement phase of their life, and they end up delaying retirement. Now, every single employee, I use 65 as the age here, but if you really think about it, every one of us, every single employee will get to a stage where they want to transition into retirement. For some employees, it's much earlier. They want to transition out around age 55. And I'm sure a lot of us sitting here will say, hey, we wish we could actually retire at age 55. But for some employees, they enjoy the intellectual challenge. They enjoy the ability to come to work. And they may decide, hey, I want to work to age 70 or 70 plus. But there comes a point in time where each employee wants to transition out. If they aren't able to transition out when they want to transition out, for you as an employer, the cost is on average about $100,000 on an annual basis. So those are the type of costs that, without adding the auto-enrollment and auto-escalation features, the long-term costs that employers would face if their employees delay retirement.
All right. Well, those are definitely some pretty compelling data points. Thanks, Felix. Now I'd like to get your perspective on some of the new provisions that are coming online as a result of the Secure Act and Secure 2.0 that were included specifically to boost the use of auto-enrollment in 401ks, and some tax incentives intended to encourage small businesses to start their own retirement plans. Felix, what do you think is going to be the impact of the new provisions?
Yeah, and so this is also one that I believe that Congress actually recognizes the need to actually provide for the citizens an ability to get to that stage and transition out into retirement. So they actually put in, if you think about the way Secure 2.0 or Secure Act was implemented, they're actually looking for ways to help plan sponsors put in play some of these features in their plan designs to get employees to participate at a high level. What does that mean? Participate at a high level. That means auto-enrollment, auto-escalating employees. They have tax incentives to new plan sponsors who want to implement a retirement program. I believe that there was a survey within financial professionals as well as employers that said about 76% believe that within the next 5 years, auto-enrollment and auto-escalation is going to be part of the law. It's going to be part of the designs. It's going to be required in plan sponsors. So making those changes now, it's not, you may very well be compelled to make those changes sooner than you anticipate. If you think about even some of the ideas around escalating beyond 10% to 15%, those are all part of the discussions that are being put in place right now. And all of this from a legislative perspective is to help plan sponsors get their employees into the plan, get them to save at a high level so that they can actually transition out into retirement sufficiently or efficiently. And now, if you really think about the spirit of the law, it is really, we don't want the social impact of employees or citizens getting to that stage where they cannot transition into retirement sufficiently because they've not saved. That tends to become a burden on society. So by helping them through auto-enrollment and auto-escalation, you get them to a place where they can actually transition out efficiently. And that's why we've seen a lot of those attributes in Secure 2.0 as well as the Secure Act.
Great. All right. Yeah, I can't wait to see how these provisions end up playing out, but I think it's definitely going to be very helpful. Well, we've covered a lot already, but before we wrap up, any closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with regarding the state of auto features in retirement plans?
I think we've covered a lot. We've talked about kind of the importance of auto features. We've talked about how to pay for the auto features. I think one final point I'd like to make is for a lot of plan sponsors, you need to recognize that for many of your employees, the 401k plan is really their only investment vehicle. And what I mean about that is you have a lot of individuals in the United States who may not necessarily be invested in stocks. Hopefully they are buying a house at some point, but that may or may not happen as well for some people. And so the retirement account provided through their employment tends to be, if not their only investment, at least one of their larger investments throughout life. So because of that, you're going to want to get your people into the plan, saving early, saving often, and saving more, quite frankly. I just want to leave all of us with that thought because I think that's something that many of us making the decisions may not necessarily recognize because it's a little bit different from probably our life experience.
Yeah. And the one thing that I would add to that is that it is doable. And what I mean by it's doable is if you allow someone to really dig into the plan and understand the features, understand like I mentioned earlier on, that there always is a risk mitigation factor, right? Let's understand the risk that your plan does pose. Let's understand the cost containment. That is, where are your cost constraints? And then by really gaining an understanding of that, you can actually design something that would include the auto-enrollment and auto-escalation features, allow your employees to participate at a very high level, but also on the back end, you as a plan sponsor, you as an employer would be able to manage the cost in such a way that it becomes a win-win situation. You get your employees to save significantly. You get them to accumulate enough assets to transition out into retirement, and you get them not to delay retirement, which would be an additive cost to you on the back end.
All right. Well, you guys have shared lots of good stuff. Marc Howell and Felix Okwaning, Managing Directors, Enhanced Plan Design at Principal Financial Group. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your insights on the 401k Specialist podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.